Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, Old Sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I am one of your co-hosts, Dan Newman. I'm joined, as always, by my brother and co-host, Andrew Newman. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I am good, Dan. We're getting into the late summer. I'm finally done with all of my various trips from the last 2 months, and unfortunately staring at a lot of weeks where I have to go to work every day. So, it's a little bit bittersweet, but on the same token, football season's almost here, and that's always fun.
Absolutely. So this is the second I guess you'd call it a series. I think the last one of these that we did was a couple of years ago. And what we do here is we pick sort of one of the greatest ever from each of the four major professional sports, and then we also throw boxing in there. And we talk about that person's last ever fight, game, whatever. And it's sort of, it's fun, it's interesting, it's a way to get a look into the career of some guys in a way that, maybe is not as well known. In some cases, it's very well known, but in other cases, it's not very well known at all. And so it's kind of also interesting because we do one guy from each of the five sports. It's kind of a fun way to juxtapose these all-time greats and how they quote unquote went out.
Yeah, and some of them it's varying levels of at least the one we did, it was like Ali was the saddest on a human level. And then Ruth was sort of next up, and it was very sad on like a baseball level. Brady and Jordan were both kind of like, they had the opportunities to really go out, and they just, what made them so great wouldn't allow them to step aside. And then Gretzky's really wasn't sad at all. Gretzky's was just sort of like he called it when it was time. And I think tonight for a lot of these we'll have, none that rise to the level of as sad as Muhammad Ali against Trevor Berbick, but varying degrees of they hung around at the fair too long. One guy who definitely didn't, and then one guy who was there forever, but there's really no comparison to that one. So we'll sort of run the gamut again here tonight.
Last time around, we really did the what I considered to be, and I didn't necessarily ask Andrew if he concurred, although I think he largely does. We did basically the what I consider the best five of all time. To me, Gretzky, Jordan, Brady, and Ruth all are clearly the best all time in their respective sports. And then Ali, whether you put him one or two or, wherever, he's up there towards the list. But those were the no-brainer guys that many people, if not most people, would consider the greatest all time in their respective sports. It's going to be a little bit different tonight. We decided to do Rocky Marciano, Kobe Bryant, Willie Mays, Jerry Rice, and who am I missing? Gordie Howe. So those are the five. I mean, I don't think that Bryant is the second best basketball player of all time by any means. I think there's probably an argument for Jerry Rice at number 2 all time in football. Willie Mays probably is the second best baseball player ever. Gordie Howe, I'm not as much of a hockey expert, but I think you could probably say he's got a good argument. And then Marciano's, top 3 or 4 probably, with guys like Dempsey, Lewis, whatever. I kind of thought that we would choose these guys because they are among the greatest of all time, and they have sort of different and varying last game stories, and by and large stories that we haven't told before. I mean, we could have chosen Bill Russell, but I'm sure we've at some point over the last 110 episodes discussed Game 7 of the 1969 NBA Finals. So for this time, I thought we'd try and largely pick guys with stories that we haven't discussed before.
And we did Magic, in a way, Magic's comeback. So
yeah,
we didn't really do Magic. We'll have to wait till LeBron joins the Knicks next offseason and key component of their second straight championship in 2027. And then we can do a retrospective on him. So yeah, it's, I think your list is as good as any, and I guess we can get into it. Where did you want to start?
I think we should probably just like last time, I think we ought to go in chronological order, and last time that was going back to 1935 with George Herman, Babe Ruth. This time I think we want to go back to September 2nd, 1955 to talk about the final ever fight of the only ever undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, Rocky Marciano.
Yeah, and Marciano, like you said, so the fight is September 21st, 1955, right?
Yes, I might have said 22nd, but that was just because I thought my 1 was a 2.
Against Archie Moore. Now, it's interesting, since I've lived here in Shelton, there's there's a bar in Milford, like a restaurant sports bar called Archie Moore's. And as best I can tell, there's absolutely no connection between Archie Moore, the boxer, and who was from Mississippi and I believe probably died a long time ago. And this restaurant in Milford, Connecticut, I think it's just a coincidence. There's no boxing memorabilia on the walls or anything like that. So that's just always, every time I hear Archie Moore now, since living there, since living here, I think of that. But yeah, so the fight, it's Marciano's 49th and final fight. I didn't realize this is only his 6th title defense. I didn't realize he won the title that late in his overall career.
I don't know if I had fully grasped that either. But I noted that, and I put that down as a note to talk about when we were when I was preparing for this episode in September of 52, he beat Jersey Joe Walcott. Jersey Joe Walcott, who we talked about as champion a bit when we did our 1950 episode a couple of weeks ago. He beat Walcott, and then 8 months later, he beat Walcott in a rematch, and then he goes on to beat Roland Lastarza, Ezzard Charles twice. Charles, who I believe had also been the champion at one point. Yeah, he was a champ. Okay, Charles was actually the champion from 49 to 51, and then lost it to Walcott. And then Marciano ended up beating up both of them twice with a defeat of Roland Lastarza in between.
That was the second time he'd fought Lastarza, and we actually talked about the first fight back in our 1950 episode, and that was a split decision. And
that's right.
Considered by a lot of people. I mean, obviously a lot of people had the fight for Lastarza, but it was also considered the closest, not even considered, it was the closest Rocky Marciano would ever come to a loss. So I just wanted to touch on that as we're going through his title defenses.
And then right before the Archie Moore fight, where he beat a guy by the name of Don Cockle, who was the British heavyweight champion, and they thought it was going to be a very easy fight, but it ended up being more difficult maybe than Marciano and his management thought it would be. And so going into the Moore fight, which is September 5th, 1955 at Yankee Stadium, it's He defends his title 3 different times at Yankee Stadium, both the Charles fights and the Archie Moore fighter at Yankee Stadium. And he actually, in between that, he fights at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, the home of the 49ers. That's where he fights the British champion Don Cockle. So going into this September of 55 fight against Archie Moore, I think it's, maybe starting to think that it's time for him to hang it up.
Yeah, and it's funny to think that because he's only 32 years old. Meanwhile, Moore, who he's fighting, is 9 years older than him. Moore's in his early 40s. But Marciano's... Go ahead. So were you about to say something?
Accounts that I saw said that Archie Moore had a little bit of Satchel Paige thing going on, where maybe his true age was not a known fact. One of the notes I had was that he is at least 38.
Okay. All right. So, and I'm just looking at the numbers and getting kind of surprised here. I was trying to do the inflation calculator. It says Marciano's purse for this fight, and Moore's was half of this. So Moore's was no slouch either. Marciano's purse for this fight in 1955 is $482,000.
Which is what?
I'm going to do the inflation right now. 482, 370.
5 million?
In September of 1955 is equal to $5.8 million. So, let it not be said that boxing was, if you were the heavyweight champion of the world, you were making good money back then, especially compared to what pro baseball players and pro football plus especially pro football, basketball players. But, being the heavyweight champion was the most lucrative thing you could be as an athlete at this point.
So, Moore, like I said, was the light heavyweight champion, and he was definitely a very interesting guy. And this is from a biography of Marciano that I'm going to read. Then this is Moore cultivated an air of mystery from his true age. He said he was 38 in 1954, but when confronted with evidence of his actual age, he quipped that he was actually 3 years old at birth. To his unusual training methods and ring tactics, he claimed to have learned a secret weight loss trick from an Australian Aborigine. He drank a secret Argentine strength extract potion that he called goose juice. It was actually just beef broth. He attributed much of his success in the ring to his personal theories of, quote, relaxism and escapology. Once, while trying to describe relaxism to a sports writer, he fell asleep. And I found something about their respective trainings here, but I gotta locate it. So just give me a second there. But you go ahead.
Sure. So, and I looked it up, by the way, in the very beginning of the Archie Moore. There's a couple of restaurants around here. The top of their About Us section says, "No, not the boxer," and it was Irish immigrant from the late 1900s. So the fight actually is delayed a day because it was threatening weather from a hurricane. I'm guessing this is Ione. I'm not sure how we're pronouncing that, but Ione. So they delay the fight a day. It's also, it's the 50s in New York, so it's about 10 days away from the beginning of the 1955 World Series, where the Dodgers at this same building at Yankee Stadium. So Marciano has, and we will, I guess, touch a little on his legacy, but Marciano has the thing that has sort of knocked him down from a lot of people in terms of reputation over the years. Because you would think that record kind of, if you don't know anything about boxing, you look and go, oh, well, he was undefeated. He retired undefeated. He's the greatest, heavyweight boxer of all time. And I guess the thing that people point to sort of diminish that is the level of competition that he faced. I mean, he beat Joe Louis in 1938, but in 1951, that was seen as Lewis, still being in boxing long after he should have been, trying to save money. And then names like Jersey Joe Walcott and Ezzard Charles are names people know, but it's not the boxing scene of, the 30s and 40s or even the 20s, and then certainly not the 60s and 70s. So, that is sort of the it's not a knock on him specifically because he fought who was in front of him. It's not like there was a well-known guy he was ducking or anything like that, but that is all, he gets ranked in the top 5 or 6 of heavyweight boxers of all time, but usually that honor goes to guys like Ali and Dempsey and Joe Louis, whereas Marciano, even with that unblemished record, is usually, a few behind them.
So I want to talk for a couple seconds here about the training, because they both have interesting training regimes. Rocky trains at a place called Grossinger's, which is I think in the immediate it's in the immediate New York area, because it says here one day Rocky didn't train at all. Oh, and I don't know where exactly this was, but he invited a group of visiting New York Yankees players to breakfast. The ball players, including Hank Bauer, Don Larson, and Elston Howard, joined Rocky's, his crew, his training crew, in a softball game on the lawn outside the cottage. They asked Rocky to umpire, and then at one point Hank Bauer hit a ball over the fence. The umpire called it foul, and Hank Bauer. Keep in mind this is a softball game at a cottage. Hank Bauer flies into a rage, and Rocky says, "That's why I didn't want to umpire." Although I don't know that Rocky Marciano would have had much trouble with Hank Bauer. Rocky's training in the Catskills, and Archie Moore is also training in the mountains. He's training in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts in a town called North Adams. He descends in a chartered plane. He starts taking flying lessons while he's there. He appears at local Rotary and Kiwanis meetings to speak about juvenile delinquency, which was a key interest of his. I'm sorry?
Or against?
I'm guessing against, because he had actually addressed this previously with President Eisenhower at a White House conference. And he even finds time to divert to Williams College to lecture on music in a lecture entitled From Bach to Pop to Bop. So he's a little bit distracted, even when he's trying to train to fight Rocky Marciano for the heavyweight championship.
I say, did you realize he was about to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world? I guess he had also already he had sort of bragged that he would be the first man to defeat Marciano, and I mean, even then, you got to wonder how much of that is guys trying to promote the fight, but it was for the time a little more outspoken than you would expect it to be. Marciano goes into this he's an overwhelming favorite, 4-1 to win the title, or to win the match and retain his title. Did you have anything additionally you wanted to get to before the fight itself?
Just a little bit on the draw. $940,000 gate. It's the closest to 1 million since Joe Louis and Billy Conn, their second fight in 1946, and it is watched by about 100,000 people in 36 cities on closed circuit.
You know what else is crazy is closed circuit, 1955.
Yeah.
And even looking at this poster here, bottom part of this poster, the thing, World Heavyweight Champion, Yankee Stadium, Rocky Marciano, Archie Moore, prices 10, 20, 30, and 40 in 1955. When we just did it, we just said that it was like 12 times as much. So that's like a $500 ticket. Yeah. It's crazy. So fight gets underway. And Marciano is, he's the aggressor, but it's a very, I watched the first couple of rounds of this and then I watched the final 2 rounds. I didn't watch the entire fight. He's fighting a very tactical fight. He's trying to sort of pierce the veil on Moore. He's not, swinging to try and knock him down early. Moore actually does knock Marciano down in the second round. Now, I watched it because I guess there was some controversy about it, but I watched it, and really he catches Marciano off balance. It's not a violent knockout or knockdown by any means. Marciano's not in any danger. He doesn't even go all the way to like his back. He just kind of lands and gets up in a 4 count. I've heard people say things about slow counts or whatever. I really did not see any of that.
Oh, you actually watched the fight?
Yeah, I watched the. Now again, it's tough to tell with like frame rates because it's a newsreel footage from 1955, but it didn't seem. I mean, at no point is Marciano in danger of not getting up. And
they did, although it is only the second time he's been knocked down in his entire career.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it was a nice punch, but it wasn't like it was a clean shot, but it was like he got right back up.
The only thing I read is that when he was knocked down, the referee gave him a standing 8 count, and apparently that had never been done in heavyweight fights before. So that was kind of like a mistake by the referee in entitling Marciano to that standing 8 count.
Which is, I like I said, I wasn't paying enough. I didn't have the audio. I don't even know if there was audio in the thing I was watching. It was also a little jarring to see in the 9th round, Marciano knocks Moore down at the end of the round. He knocks him down in the 7th round, I think, or the 8th round. He knocks him down, and Moore gets saved by the bell, which has not been a thing in boxing for a very, very long time. It's been an expression now far longer than it was like an active thing in boxing. And being saved by the bell, for anybody who doesn't know, is, you get knocked down with less than 10 seconds in the round. So now, I mean, Moore maybe could have gotten up, but realized the round was about to end. So he just laid there, but he wasn't unconscious or anything, but he gets saved by the bell in the 8th. And then in the 9th, Marciano just kind of imposes his will. He lands 2 straight lefts to like consecutive lefts, not straight lefts. He lands 2 lefts. Moore goes down. It's the 4th time Moore's been knocked down. He's still not unconscious or anything like that, but a thing I haven't seen that much where like a guy is actually trying to get up but can't beat the referee's count. Usually if a guy gets knocked down, I either, and when I say modern, I mean in the last 30 years that I've seen much boxing, or 40 years, usually it's like the guy either gets knocked down and the fight gets stopped, he's legitimately unconscious, or he just doesn't get up because he like sits there because he does, he knows he's beat. It's rare to see a guy like actually trying to get up and not get up in 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Marciano wins. He gets to 49-0. He had not immediately announced anything. It would be actually 6 more months before he officially announces his retirement. I see the New York Times from April 28th of 1956. The headline: Rocky Marciano, iron-fisted son of a New England shoe factory worker, retired yesterday as undefeated world heavyweight champion at the age of 31 to devote more time to his family. The comeback trail, Marciano said, will never feel the weight of his feet so long as his present prosperity continues. To a boxing world that has seen numerous comebacks followed by comebacks, Marciano said, I thought it was a mistake when Joe Louis tried to come back. No man can say what he will do in the future, but barring poverty, the ring has seen the last of me. I am comfortably fixed, and I am not afraid of the future. Barring a complete and dire emergency, you will never see Rocky Marciano make a comeback. Rocky's retirement was first disclosed by his wife, Barbara, yesterday in the morning of their home in Brockton, Massachusetts.
And just a couple of things that I read. He was obsessed with money. He was not in a greedy way, but like he was always worried about not having enough money, having grown up poor. And so, and I really want to learn more about this. And maybe I need to fully read this biography of his that I have here. But and I heard this before, he often carted around a shopping bag filled with thousands of dollars in cash. He didn't trust banks. He wouldn't take checks. And he hoarded cash wherever he could, stuffing it into electrical sockets, pipe fittings, curtain rods, and toilet bowl tanks around the United States. I don't know what that means. I mean, are these places that he regularly had access to, or would this just be, he's in Philadelphia at a restaurant and he decides to hide $1,000 thinking he's going to come back for it one day? I'm sure there's more information about that somewhere, but I didn't have it. The only other thing I saw is that really up until the mid-1960s when he's over 40, which again, given what other boxers did and have done since, it's not crazy to expect that the guy would come back in his early 40s. But I think even as late as like 1966, when he's, over 40, there's still talk that maybe he might come back. And I think he also, to a lot of people, and to be fair, I think there certainly is a racial angle to this. I think to a lot of people, he represented sort of a bygone golden era. And it's funny how athletes come in some ways to sort of represent the heavyweight champions, kind of represent the times that they were champion. I think you could say that to a degree about Lewis. I think you could probably say that about Ali. You could say it about Tyson. You could certainly say it going all the way back to the beginning about John L. Sullivan. To me, in a lot of ways, Rocky Marciano was sort of a perfect champion for the 1950s.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you talk about him being like this fondly, remembered champion and, the racial aspect to it. It's like he retired in 1955. He won the heavyweight title in 1952. You and I have seen the articles about Joe DiMaggio, from who was still playing in the early 50s, from just 15 years earlier, where like Italians really weren't considered white at the time. But, it just shows how things kind of shifted, can shift rapidly in that regard, where you're right. He kind of becomes the symbol of and I know he fought before, but like of the post-war sort of, and I don't know, I mean, I know he was a devout Catholic and, was hardly a mainline WASP in line of the 40s and 50s, but kind of was seen as the sort of clean cut champion who, you kids these days want to talk about Muhammad Ali, Rocky Marciano. That was a real fighter, that kind of thing, which isn't really fair to him either.
And I do have to say, I would be remiss in not mentioning that he was my favorite guy to use in Sega Genesis Greatest Heavyweights. He was, I loved him.
Yeah, that was a game that was fun, except for the fact that we could never figure out really how to get up if you got knocked down.
Yeah, there's that.
So it says he did briefly consider coming out of retirement in 1959, but after like a couple of days of training, he was just like, nope, that's it. I don't have it in me. And then, he's involved in the media. He does some TV stuff. And then he is tragically dies in a plane crash in what year was it? Mid 60s?
69.
69. He is killed in a plane crash. Just, God, how old was he? Was he 45 years old at the time?
Yeah, and there's obviously a bookend here.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
But
wasn't that where the plane crash the day the music died was in Iowa?
It was in the Midwest somewhere. I don't remember exactly where.
August 31st, 1969, the day before his 46th birthday. Private plane heading to Des Moines from Chicago. Bad weather, inexperienced pilot, et cetera, et cetera. And he is killed at just 45 years old, just the day before his 46th birthday.
All right, why don't we fast forward a bit here to April 11th, 1980 in Andrew's neck of the woods. No, we're not going to do that yet. What?
Not going chronologically?
No, we are. I'm sorry. I was forgetting that. I was ready to skip to Gordie Howe, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go to Willie Mays on October 16th, 1973. And that's kind of, I guess that game was at Shea, I think. So that's sort of kind of still your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I guess it's right across the Long Island Sound. So I guess we should talk Willie Mays, middle of 1972, actually was it like May of 1972, is traded to the Mets. He'd been a Giant for, over 20 years at this point. He'd been with the New York Giants starting in 1951 and, missed the better part of 2 years because of Korea, but was with the Giants till 1957 in New York. They moved to San Francisco and he becomes the linchpin of the first 15 years of the San Francisco Giants existence. They win the pennant in 1962. He, spends the majority of his career as a San Francisco Giants, but by the early 70s he's seeing and we should point out again, he's 40 years old, but he's seeing a significant decline in his skills. By the early 70s he is traded to the Mets. And what I thought was interesting here is some of the quotes when they talk about his trade to the Mets, that like the Stonehams were like a big, and this again sort of goes to the difference between then and now. A big concern was like, well, we have to make sure Willie is okay for life after baseball, after having been in baseball for 20 something years.
And Joan Payson, the owner of the Mets, basically agrees to take care of him with a job or whatever once he retires from playing.
And I mean, as it would turn out, he would, spend most of his career as the rest of his life, which only ended last year, as kind of a elder statesman with the San Francisco Giants. But that was far from a foregone conclusion at the time. Joan Payson long wanted to bring him to his major league roots, and Mets debut his debut is against the Giants on May 14th of 1972.
And he had kind of struggled, not on the field, but in San Francisco, he had gotten booed. And I don't necessarily think it was a prejudice thing, because I think that some of his contemporaries, like Willie McCovey, were really, very beloved in San Francisco. But for whatever reason, Willie Mays, he got booed a lot in San Francisco years. I think at some
early,
I think sometime in the 60s, probably.
Because I know originally early, and maybe this was overblown, but one of the things was that they loved DiMaggio out there so much.
Could be.
I've heard this, that there was a little built-up resentment towards Willie because for years, and yeah, they were a continent away, but everybody always heard about the comparisons between Mantle and or Mays, and like sort of Mays being the next DiMaggio and Mays being this next, even though they didn't really overlap at all, except 1951. But I did hear there was a little, but that was gone pretty quickly. I think that was in the very early, 58, 59 kind of thing in San Francisco.
I'm reading something here from ESPN, which is old because it's like that old ESPN font. And I guess Orlando Cepeda was a lot more popular than Willie Mays with the Giants fans. And a newspaper writer, and I guess at some point in the 50s, and Nikita Khrushchev came to town and got a positive reaction in San Francisco. And this guy said, "What a strange city this is. They cheer Khrushchev and they boo Willie Mays." So, but he goes to New York and he announces his retirement on September 19th of 1973. And in his speech, he says basically how glad he was to be back in New York. He said, in New York, you can hit 211 and not get booed. And, in San Francisco, it was not that way. Now, obviously, in the current day, maybe not so much, but, and like you said, he spent a lot of time with the Giants, organization later in his life. But in 72 and 73, he was really glad to be back in New York playing.
And I think a lot of fans were too, because again, you sort of talk, a lot of Mets fans at that point had been San Francisco Giants fans or New York Giants fans up until the 50s. And you hear all the stories about a lot of Mets fans who was, and again, this was the late 50s into the early 60s, jumped headlong into the Mets when the Mets became a team. But then when the Giants or the Dodgers would come back, they would still kind of half root for the guys they liked from those teams before they moved. So Mays coming back in 73 is again sort of a tie into the old days. And also, again, guy goes a continent away in the 60s. How often are you seeing him? You're not
That's
seeing
true too. Yeah.
Highlights all the time. You get to see Willie Mays again. I'm just seeing this. Did you know that in 73 in spring training, he left in the middle of spring training. And he came back a few days later. He didn't notify Berra. He just left. Came back, was fined $1,000. And did you know what the joke from the sports writer was?
What?
So he's fined $1,000, and the joke was he was fined half of it for leaving and half of it for returning.
Well, we'll get to that piece of things in a second here. He actually has a halfway decent season in 72. Bats 250 on the year, but 267 with the Giants. Does better with the Giants. 8 home runs with the Mets in 69 games. So that's not great, but it's not absolutely terrible either. By 73, it's obvious that he should really be on his way out. He is how old is he at this point? Was born in 31, so he's 42 years of age. He announces his retirement on September the 19th. He hasn't played in a game since the 9th of September, and he doesn't play the whole rest of the season. And this is the Mets team that is embroiled in one of the strangest pennant races of all time. This is the famous "You Gotta Believe" Mets team that was in last place, at some point in the in the spring or early summer. And let me see if I can get the final standings. They end up winning the pennant at the very end of the season. They're a game and a half above the 81-81 Cardinals, and the Pirates, Expos, and Cubs are all within 5 games. Even the 71-91 Phillies are only 11 and a half games out. And you compare that to the team they end up playing in the NLCS. The Reds are a 99-win team, so they eke out a pennant in this crazy season, and then they go to the first to the NLCS against the Cincinnati Reds, the very, very heavily favored Cincinnati Reds. They beat the Reds in 5 games. I don't know if Mays ever appears in. He appears in the NLCS. He pinch hits in the very last game of the NLCS, the one that the Mets win mid game in that game 5, and that's the game that they end up winning. In that game against Cincinnati, he actually does have a hit and a run, a single. The most famous thing that he does is that he, along with Berra and Tom Seaver and many of the others, are part of the delegation that goes out to the outfield to try and calm down the Met fans and get them to stop throwing things on the field when Pete Rose and Bud Harrelson get in a fight. I think that's game 2. That's that's the most prominent thing that Mays does in the whole NLCS.
Yeah, it's try to calm everybody down. So they go to the World Series, and I kind of never put this together, but it is fitting kind of that it's New York and a team from the Bay Area. So it's like,
I never thought of that either. It's a good point.
The places he spent, his entire career. So he actually plays early in the series. He actually plays a lot of these games. He plays. He starts game 1.
Rusty Staub is hurt, and so even though Mays has not started a game in over a month, he starts game 1 in Oakland, back in the Bay Area. Berra hits him 3rd in game 1, and it's a 2-1 Met loss to Oakland. But yeah, hasn't played for over a month. Starts, bats 3rd, gets a hit.
He plays in game 2. He says he plays 9 innings. So I think did he come in the 4th inning or something like that?
Let me pull that up. I have some notes here. It's a 10-7 Met win in 12. He enters the game in the 9th.
Oh, okay, I'm reading this wrong. Okay. So he goes in the game in the 9th. He goes 1 for 2. He gets his last career hit, which obviously isn't gonna count in his career totals. He gets an RBI.
But the hit he has is the RBI he has breaks the tie. Now, the Mets, there's a 6-6 tie. Now, the Mets end up getting 3 more runs in that inning, and then Oakland gets one in the bottom of the inning before the Mets close it out. But his RBI is considered the game-winning RBI of that game. On the other hand, he falls down rounding second base, and he falls down chasing 2 different fly balls. So
the famous game on the other side where Charlie Finley made the guy sign the affidavit that he was injured after the game. And
who was that? Not Epstein, no. Andrews, that's right. Yeah.
So and obviously Mike Andrews, yeah.
The best part of that whole story is that the manager was it Dick Williams, the Hall of Fame manager of the A's, who Dick Williams manages a bunch of different places in his career, manages the Impossible Dream Red Sox, manages the Padres when they go to the World Series in '84. Despite the fact that they've won the World Series and are on the way to winning another, Williams gets so sick of Charlie Finley that even though he's won 2 World Series, he quits after the series is over, because he's just so sick of that kind of stuff from Finley.
So this brings us to October 16th, 1973, back at Shea Stadium. Series is tied at 1 game apiece, and Willie Mays comes in to pinch hit for Tug McGraw, the pitcher. He doesn't get a hit. I don't know I think he grounds out.
I have it up here. Give me a second. He grounds out. It's a fielder's choice, shortstop to second base in the bottom of the 10th, and the Mets fail to score, and then the A's push one across in the top of the 11th.
Yeah, so game 2, he gets the game-winning, sort of the game-winning hit, and the game the Mets win. Had that been it, had the Mets, maybe won the series, it might be seen a little differently, but he spends the next 4 games watching from the dugout as the Mets win game 4 and 5 at Shea Stadium to take a 3-2 lead in the series, and then go back to Oakland and lose 3-1 and 5-2 as Willie Mays' career ends with 4 games in the dugout after that pinch hit in game 3 of the 1973 World Series.
And unfortunately, what people remember is the falling down in the outfield, the falling down, rounding second base, so much so that it has become almost a part of the American lexicon. This whole Willie Mays on the Mets thing. I think when Seinfeld canceled his show in the late 90s, he said, "I don't want to be like Willie Mays on the Mets." And you see these comparisons. I'm looking at a Grantland article here. I don't even know what it's about, but it says, it's entered, it's Willie Mays on the Mets phase. And so unfortunately, when you hear that phrase, it's not about going to a World Series. It's not about going back to New York. It becomes a sort of a metaphor for a guy hanging on too long and, potentially tarnishing his legacy.
And it's funny because, first of all, the things everybody talks about in that, they're talking about one specific game in the 73 World Series, which they won, and he got the game-winning
hit. Yeah.
And then there's a couple of guys we're going to talk about. Really, I guess there's one. Well, now we're going to talk about 2 more guys who, kind of, I don't know that there was more dignity in the way they went out than in the way Willie Mays went out. So, he probably got a little more crap for that than he deserved, but I think it was the fact that it was the World Series again, where he had made that catch in 1954. And the fact that he was known as this, the greatest fielder of all time. And it's specifically him kicking the ball around, falling down in the outfield. That was sort of the stark thing. But truthfully, again, that's a little reductionist to the full story. And, if the Mets had won that World Series, it would have been, they got one more for Willie, and Willie got to end his career as a champion, and that kind of thing. So it's sometimes the narrative, we do a disservice. I think more than sometimes, probably more often than not, we do a disservice to the nuances of the story in service of sort of reducing it to 1 or 2 lines.
And there's parallels with Ruth here, where it was like you could still hit the ball, but it was the rest of it, the running the bases, the being in the field, that really was the source of any embarrassment.
Yes.
All right. Why don't we now fast forward to April 11th, 1980, to Andrew's neck of the woods in Hartford, Connecticut, and we will talk about the legendary Gordie Howe.
So this has layers. There's a lot of parts.
This is a good one.
Have to sort of explain, and this is probably the least sad one of what we're specifically talking about here. And so Gordie Howe is. And I don't know that I ever fully grasped all of this until I was much older. Gordie Howe comes into the NHL at 18 years old in 1946 with the Red Wings. And he plays until he's 42 just with the Red Wings. Remarkably durable. Played him. This was when the NHL season was 70 games, and he played, pretty much 70 games every year. Never. After 1949, he never played less than 64 games out of the full 70 in a season. And he finally, after the 1972 season, 70-71 season, retires from the Red Wings. He calls it a career. He moves into a position with the front office. He, thinks he's going to have a little more say in the affairs of the Red Wings than he does. And a year later, 2 years later, he's given the opportunity to come back and play with his sons, Mark Howe and Marty Howe, with the Houston Aeros or Arrows. I don't know how it's Aeros. I don't know how they
Arrows
of the World Hockey Association, which is, it's professional hockey. It's, in some ways annoying to the NHL, but nobody's going to mistake it for a top tier league, even on caliber with like the ABA or certainly the AFL. It's a USFL caliber thing, I guess I would say, right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit above my depth here with this. I guess what I would say is that the evidence that they're more on the ABA level is that some teams eventually folded into the NHL. So that's again, no, I'm not an expert on this, but to me, it's like, I don't think there was ever any serious talk of any USFL teams joining the NFL. So maybe that's why I consider it a step above, but I could also just be wrong about that. It's not my area of expertise.
I think what that says, and it's not my area of expertise either. I think what that says is that the NBA and much more specifically the NFL were on a higher level in the 70s and 80s than the NHL was in the early 70s.
That's fair too.
So he's playing there in his mid 40s. And again, I guess I could also say the fact that he was doing this well in this league at 45 years old probably shows something. He plays with Houston. Him and his boys, and I think the real draw to this for him was playing with his sons. He's with the Houston team for 4 years, playing against 70, 75, 78 games. In the 77-78 season, they move, not Houston, but the Howe family. They go to the New England Whalers, and they play a couple of years with the New England Whalers. And going into the 1979-1980 season, and it's not really a merger. It's an acquisition, but essentially the WHA disbands going into the 1979-1980 NHL season. The Edmonton Oilers, Winnipeg Jets, Quebec Nordiques, so 3 Canadian teams, and the New England Whalers, who are renamed the Hartford Whalers at the insistence of the Boston Bruins, join the NHL, bringing the total to 21 teams. There's 2 other teams, the Birmingham Bulls and the Cincinnati Stingers. They were paid to fold. So those teams go into the league, and there's, it's not the point of the episode, but there's a bunch of different stuff that goes on about that, about the merger itself, and how, the forget what the league did, but they really did not did not welcome those teams into the league with open arms. Really, they kind of accepted them and then tried to punish them for existing, basically. But let me see if I can find this. That was the big thing. The existing NHL teams were allowed to reclaim players they held rights to who had WHA contracts. So technically, Detroit could have taken Gordie Howe back, but they opted not to do that.
Well, you wonder if he also made it known to them, like, first of all, I'm 52, in case you didn't remember. And second of all, maybe he just said he just wouldn't even go.
Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't have. So he comes in to, and I have a good article here on a Red Wings blog that talks about this. I'm just trying to get to it. So sort of, he doesn't come back to the NHL. He's on a team that enters the NHL. So all of a sudden at 51 years old, he is in the NHL again after a decade, basically, including, he's obviously going to go play against Detroit in a few times in the year. This team also ends up with Bobby Hull on the team. So they have another aging older player. It's also interesting that Marty Howe doesn't make the team out of camp. So his one son is sent to the minor leagues, and it's just him and his other son on the team at first. Marty did get called up late in the season, and they played in a few games in the regular season and in the playoffs.
They trade for Bobby Hull very late in the season, and I'm where was he coming from? He had been on Winnipeg, which was another former, WHA team, and I'm pretty sure that Winnipeg is one of the teams that does not make maybe you were about to get into this, in which case I apologize. Only 5 teams don't make the playoffs. So even with a 21-team league, 16 teams don't make the playoffs. 2 of those are former WHA teams, Winnipeg and Quebec. And then who was the fourth one that went in? What was the fourth Canada team? The third Canada team?
Winnipeg, Quebec, and Edmonton.
Okay, Edmonton made it in.
TNC, yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Hull is on one of the other teams that is not headed towards the playoffs. So the Whalers bring him in the very sort of stretch run, and at one point, Bobby Hull plays on a line with himself. Gordie Howe plays on a line with himself, Bobby Hull, and another very older individual whose name I can just pull up here with a 39-year-old by the name of Dave Keon. 3 guys 39 or over on this line.
It's also interesting this probably even more made the Bruins angry that the Whalers also began the season still playing in Springfield, Massachusetts, because the roof had collapsed at the Hartford Civic Center in 1978, and it was still not fully repaired yet till this season was already underway.
I don't remember the context, but this is not the first time we've talked about that on an episode.
We talked about it with the Celtics, something with preseason games with the Celtics. I don't remember why we were talking about that. But
yeah, somehow we got into it. It might have even been when we had the author on to talk about Comiskey Park. I don't know.
Might have been. So they start the season, they're not very good, but it's, a guy who he at the beginning of the year, he becomes the oldest player to play in an NHL game. He plays in all 80 games. He's on the All-Star team. Howe could hardly be trusted not to be back in the NHL the following season. Career, I certainly believed that Howe would play the one NHL season and then call it quit. They also did finish higher than Detroit, which I think was probably a little bit of comfort for him. He has his sort of homecoming in Detroit where he gets a big hand, and I guess the relationship had thawed at least a little bit from when he thought he would be involved in the decision-making of the organization, and he wasn't. So the end of the year comes, and I think due to the league having just just added some teams and reorganized, there's no like division or conference alignment here. They seed everybody 1 to 16, and that's the playoff format. So
It's funny because I was just looking at the standings somewhere, and I was just like, why are they? I don't know, it was Wikipedia or something. I was saying, why are they listing it out this way? And I thought it was just a poor way of presenting the standings, but they actually were just a 1-16 that year.
And then they also reseed after every round, so it's even harder to follow it. So the Islanders, or excuse me, not the Islanders. The Islanders won the cup that year. So Hartford is a 14 seed. They play the number 3 seeded Montreal Canadiens, who I think had won like 4 Stanley Cups in a row or something. They were definitely the defending Stanley Cup champions. It's a best 3 out of 5 series. The Canadiens do sweep them, but it's a relatively, it's a relatively competitive series for being a 3-game sweep and a 3-14 matchup. In game 2, Howe has a goal and an assist, and those would be the last ones of his career.
And the goal is assisted by his son.
Mm-hmm. And then in game 3, back in Hartford. So the first 2 games had been up in Montreal. This is game 3 back in Hartford. And they lose 4-3 in overtime. So they do, Howe doesn't score, but he plays in the game, and he is involved as the Canadiens sweep the Whalers out of the playoffs. And the last game of his career takes place at 52 years old in Hartford after having been out of the NHL for better than 10 years or close to 10 years. And he comes back, and he also has the honor of playing in 5 different decades because he made it into the 1980s.
I want to get to that in a second, but just a couple things about maybe just a little bit more about the series. First of all, in game 3, Howe almost scores in the third period. So sort of like Willie Mays getting the game-winning RBI in Game 2 of the World Series. Howe could theoretically have had what could have been considered the game-winning goal in Game 3 of that series. Now, chances are, even if they somehow manage to squeak out that game, and Game 3 is the only game that they lead in. They finally get a lead in Game 3, which makes sense. They're back at home. They're probably feeling a little bit of momentum. They also had lost their top scorer, a guy by the name of Blaine Stoughton. They had lost him to an injury in Game 1, so the Whalers are playing shorthanded. The Canadiens are led by a guy named Yvonne Lambert, who scores 6 goals in the 3-game series. Howe and the Whalers, they are weak. They do lose to the Canadiens. As you said, this was that era in hockey where like every team was just winning 4 in a row. Montreal won 3 or 4 in a row, and then you had the Islanders, and then you had Edmonton in the mid to late 80s. They ask him after the game whether he plans to retire. He says, quote, "Ask Bobby Hull. He's retired more times than I have." But he does finally retire on June 4th, 1980. And he says he, quote, thinks he does have another half year in him, but he doesn't want to play a full season, so he decides to retire.
And this one is almost, if in the abstract he said a guy was in his early 50s playing in the NHL, and, you would almost say, oh, it's tarnishing his legacy. This one didn't. I think it was because he retired after a really long career, went to go play with his sons, in kind of a second-tier league, and then really sort of incidentally was brought back into the league and was still able to play at a high enough level where he didn't embarrass himself. He was playing every game. And I am sure that the Whalers were happy to have him as an attraction. You know what I mean? Would a contender have probably had much use for a guy in his early 50s? No, I'm sure a team that wasn't worrying about their attendance would not have. But it's not like he was out there and, humiliating himself and falling down every night.
No, and the guy scores a goal in the playoffs against the best, the best team in hockey. And you talked about the 5-decade thing a minute ago, too. He legitimately plays in 5 decades. This is not like a Minnie Minoso thing where a guy comes to hit, a couple times just so he can say he did it. He is a legitimate part of a playoff team, in 5 different decades.
And apparently some minor league team did bring him in 1996 so that it could be 6 decades. That one we can dismiss as a stunt, but
yeah, that's like when Buck O'Neil came to bat when he was 92, and it was like, well, they intentionally walked him, and then somebody else ran to first for him. It's like, okay, that's just proof that the man was alive. Like, that's all that really was. Like, but this is legit.
Yeah, no, you're right about
and
that.
Early 50s, too. I mean, how many players in how many sports? I mean, the only other thing that comes to mind is like a George Blanda thing, and he was just a kicker. Like, the guy is playing in a playoff game and scoring at 52. That's crazy.
Do you see yourself in 3 or 4 years being able to play hockey at that high a level?
Well, first of all, I'd have to learn to ice skate, so no. Second of all, I'm only 42 now, so I won't be in my early 50s in 3 or 4 years.
I'm not sure. I think you've got a little Archie Moore in you.
All right, we got 2 more. Do we want to move on to the sport? We're going to move into the 21st century now, and want to move on to January 8th, 2005. Incidentally, that was the day that I came to D.C. for the first time, moved to D.C. as a college student for the first time in my life. January 8th, 2005, we have the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Denver. No, who did they take on in this game? I'm drawing a blank on that.
The Rams.
Wrong conference. The St. Louis Rams.
And I can tell you what I did that day. I went to the I worked at the AMP. I actually got called in and worked early. And then I had dinner at Perkins. I'm not sure why I remember that. And I was listening to the end of the game we're about to talk about on the radio on my way home. And then the next day I watched the Giants get their butts kicked by Carolina.
No.
Was this 04 season?
Yeah, 04 season.
Oh, okay. Never mind. All that first part was right.
You're thinking of that game against Carolina, right? The Giants, where they just got the hell kicked out of them.
All right. So let's start here with Jerry Rice. So Rice is a 49er until 2000. In the 2000 offseason, he goes and he's born in 62. So in 2000, he's 38. He goes to the Raiders going into the 2000 season. And, I don't say this jokingly, but like now a guy at the end of his career who was big name going to the Raiders is almost a cliche. The Raiders are actually good at this point, and it's seen as a big move. The 49ers had been down for a year or so. Terrell Owens had emerged as the star on that team. They also had, I think they have J.J. Stokes on that team. But
yeah, he was the second receiver, or once Rice left, he was the second receiver.
Owens is the star, and the 49ers actually cut Jerry Rice in June of 01. It was one of those June 1st cuts back when that was a thing. So he goes to the Raiders. The Raiders are a, pretty perennial playoff team at the time. He's on the Raiders through the 01 and 02 and 03 seasons. He's still has a good handful of years there. He's teamed up with Tim Brown. In 02, the Raiders are really the best team in football for the whole year. People kind of forget how good those Raiders teams were for a couple of years. 2000, they got to the AFC Championship game and lost to the Ravens. 2001, they lost in the divisional round in the Tuck Rule
game. Yeah.
Regardless of anything you'd want to say about that, it's hard to argue anything other than they were very close to going to the AFC Championship game that year too. And then in 2002, they were really the best team in football the whole year. They ran through the playoffs pretty solidly. Jerry Rice has 92 catches for 1,211 yards, 7 touchdowns, second team All-Pro. Rich Gannon's the MVP of the league.
You may have said this, but you got a fellow Hall of Fame receiver, Tim Brown, opposite him.
He becomes the all-time leader in scrimmage yards that year. They beat up on the Jets in the second round of the playoffs. They beat up on Tennessee in the AFC Championship game. they get their butts kicked in the Super Bowl. The wheels have kind of fallen off because Gruden was gone. They get embarrassed in the Super Bowl. The next year, Gannon gets hurt. They fall apart in 2003. Rice still has decent numbers, but the team falls all the way to 4-12. He's now 41 or whatever he is. And go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's why they're so considered so sort of not good retrospectively. You don't remember it because they were in the Super Bowl. They got smacked in the Super Bowl. They turned the ball over a bunch of times because they forgot to change their play calls, even though the head coach of the opposite team had been their coach the year before. Remember there was that whole thing where the center, what was his name? Barrett Robbins disappeared. He had like some sort of a weird, like manic depressive episode. And then they just totally fall off a cliff. Like you said, 4-12, fire the coach, etc. So they don't sort of go out with a whimper after this Super Bowl. They just completely are crap for years after this.
Yeah. So, he's still in 03, 63 catches for 869 yards at 41 years old. Starts the 04 season with the Raiders. He goes, he's with them through he's with them through 5 games. How many games does he play with the Raiders in 04? 6 games with the Raiders. He only has 5 catches for 67 yards. He's obviously unhappy being there, and they trade him during their bye week for basically nothing, a 7th round pick. It's basically just to move Rice along. I think it's understood that he's that he's there for 1 year. I don't think he has any expectation that Seattle's going to hold on to him after that season. And Seattle had been coming up a little bit. They'd been in the wild card round of the playoffs, I think, the year before. I think the year before was that we want the ball, we're going to score, Matt Hasselbeck team.
I think you're right.
So they trade Rice. It also reunites him with Mike Holmgren, who had been this offensive coordinator. Now, that's at this point, that's well over a decade ago that that Mike Holmgren was with Jerry Rice. The thing I remember the most about this is that he kind of pressured Steve Largent into letting him wear number 80.
I don't remember that.
Steve Largent, I think that at that time, I don't even know how many retired numbers the Seahawks had. I think they may have always done that 12 thing for the fans. Steve Largent and maybe one other number. And Jerry Rice kind of. So I saw this article. It was from earlier in the year. It was Matt Hasselbeck. Or he said, it's not a young guy, old guy thing. Like when I was in Seattle, numbers mean something to players. Jerry Rice signed with the Seahawks late in his career. He wanted to wear 80, and 80 was basically retired because Steve Largent, a Hall of Fame. This is him speaking, so it might sound a little, whatever. Basically, Steve Largent got put in a tough spot. Jerry Rice, the greatest receiver of all time, asked, "What are you going to do? Say no?" Or excuse me, Jerry Rice, the greatest receiver of all time, asked, "What are you going to do? Say no?" It's a little bit harder to say no there, and then he wore 80. That was interesting. So, he kind of put him in a bit of a tough spot where it was seen as like, you're going to be on this team for 11 games. Why don't you just wear number, whatever the heck and be done with it?
Can I wildly digress here for a minute?
Yeah.
I was looking up Steve Largent because I was trying to remember. This was around the time that Steve Largent was in Congress. So I thought that it would have been even stranger if Steve Largent was in Congress when Jerry Rice was pressuring him. He wasn't. He had retired from Congress in 2002 to run for governor. And I'm just seeing here, and this just made me laugh. Steve Largent lost a close race to his Democratic opponent, a guy by the name of Brad Henry, in the 2002 Oklahoma gubernatorial race.
Roughly the same politically.
Well, here is why this is Wikipedia. They attribute Largent's loss to the fact that his opponent was a strong supporter of cockfighting. that may have tipped the ballot in favor. It does not surprise me that the gubernatorial race in Oklahoma turned on the issue of cockfighting, but I thought that would have been in like 1944, not 2002. Anyway.
So he gets traded to Seattle. It's actually interesting that he plays in 17 games in this season because he gets traded during Seattle's bye week and the Raiders have already had their bye. So he, in a 16-game season at 42 years old, he plays for 17 games. And I know we're talking about the last game, but as you look at the game logs for this season, it's very interesting because, so, I'll just give you receptions. When he was in Oakland, 2 receptions, 0 receptions, 2 receptions, 1, 0, 0. Now, for the Seattle ones, I will give you also the yardage totals and touchdowns if applicable. First game with Seattle, 1 reception, 10 yards, 1 reception, 6 yards, 1 reception, 5 yards, 1 reception, 9 yards, then 3 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown against Miami on November 21st, 2 receptions for 24 yards against Buffalo, and then on a Monday night against the Dallas Cowboys, one of probably his most iconic rivals, 8 receptions for 145 yards and a touchdown. And then after that, 5 receptions for 52 yards, 3 receptions for 25 yards, and a touchdown in his last game against his last touchdown ever at the Meadowlands against the Jets. And then his last 2 regular season games does not have a catch, only 2 targets and 3 targets respectively. So, really outside of that, I guess he had a decent game against Miami and then that monster game against Dallas on December 6th, really was, and I actually think I remember that game now too, because it was a Monday night. It would have still been first semester. And I think I was watching that game at Mike and my friend Mike, who's still, going to be the best man at my wedding. I think I remember watching him get mad about Jerry Rice torching the Cowboys. So that's the end of the regular season, but Seattle does make the playoffs and they get in as a wild card against their division rivals, the St. Louis, or excuse me, no, they win the division. They win the division
at 9-7, and the Rams get in at 8-8.
Yeah. So this must have been could that have been the 3-6? 04? God, 04 was bad in the NFC.
It could have been 4-5 too, right? No, because there were 4 divisions by this point.
Yeah. So the Vikings were the 3 seed because they lost to the Eagles. Whatever. This really doesn't matter.
The other wild card. Well, I'd say this is why it's even harder. The Rams and Vikings were. Oh no, Seattle was 4. Seattle was a 4 because there was the Eagles with 13, Packers with 10, Falcons with 11. So Seattle was the 4 seed. So that must mean the Rams were the 5, and then Minnesota was the 6.
Oh, and you know what that game was? That was the next day. The Minnesota Green Bay game was the game where Randy Moss pretended to moon the fans.
Yes, I remember watching that. The first full day I was in DC with all the people I had just met and seeing Randy Moss do that, and Joe Buck with that is a disgusting act.
So they play Seattle, Rams against Seattle. Excuse me, they play the Rams. Rams against Seattle. This is the first year of the Mark Bulger, where he's post Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner was with the Giants in this season. But it's still like the greatest show on turf Rams, but it's just kind of over for them. Torrey Holt, Marshall Faulk, a lot of the usual suspects, but it's a back and forth game. The Rams are actually up 14-3. Seattle comes storming back, takes a 20-17 lead. And then the Rams end up winning 27-20 on a Mark Bulger pass to Cam Cleland with 2 minutes and 11 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Like we mentioned, Jerry Rice does not catch a pass in this game. I don't even know if he has a target in this. He
doesn't, and that was the thing I was just about to mention. He's not even targeted in this game, so I don't know if that's just happenstance, because like you said, his targets had been going down, but he starts the game, but he never gets targeted. And just a couple other things that I have here. His daughter, Jackie, Jaqui, Jaqui actually sings the national anthem at the game in Seattle. And the Seahawks, it's like you said, it's a back and forth game, and the Seahawks actually have a chance to tie the game at the very end. But Bobby Engram drops a TD pass from Hasselback in the end zone in the closing minutes. And after the game, Rice defends Engram. He says Bobby made a really good play on the ball and almost came up with it. It would have been a great catch. It didn't happen. And Engram says that the play kind of sums up the entire season. He says it's been a battle all year, and it's a crazy year, a lot of ups and downs, and we just have to find a way to win games like this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the following year, Seattle makes it all the way to the Super Bowl, right, against Pittsburgh.
They do.
Without Jerry Rice.
Rice actually does, and I was worried you were going to throw this one at me, and I was going to. Rice actually does sign with the Broncos in the offseason. The he's with the Broncos for the entire preseason. It says here he briefly moved up to the number 3 slot on the depth chart, but was bumped back down during the preseason. Caught 4 passes for 24 yards in the preseason. He's obviously at 42, not going to play special teams. So
not as Jerry Rice. No.
So the 4th or 5th receiver not, being 42 and not playing special teams isn't really a winning formula. So he's cut or decides on his own to retire. But on September 5th, 2005, Rice announces his retirement after 20 seasons. The following August, he signs a 1-day deal with the 49ers so that he can retire as a 49er officially. It says here, signed a 1-day contract for $1,985,806.49. The number represented the year Rice was drafted in 1985, is number 80, the year he retired, and the 49ers, 49. The figure was ceremonial, and Rice received no money. I was wondering if it got like prorated for a day, and he got like $16 or
whatever that would be. Yeah, $100. Yeah.
So he retires, and his last game is in that Seattle Seahawks uniform, playing against the St. Louis Rams in a losing effort in which he does not even get targeted in the game. And but he did. I mean, he had one really classic game for the Seahawks. Not the last game, but he did. He did manage to have one sort of dominant game for them.
So this is the second one of these episodes that we've done, and we've done 10 guys. Boxing, obviously, being an individual sport is a different thing, but you kind of look at it. Babe Ruth, career with the Yankees, went out with the Braves. Tom Brady, career with the Patriots, went out with the Bucks. Wayne Gretzky, career with the Oilers and the Kings, goes out with the Rangers. Jordan, career with the Bulls, goes out with the Wizards. And then tonight we got Gordie Howe, known as a Red Wing, played a lot with the Whalers, but he's obviously played 20 some odd years with the Red Wings, so that's his team. Mays, a Giant, goes out with the Mets. Jerry Rice, 49er, or even you want to say a little bit of Raider, goes out with the Seahawks. Now we're on to Kobe Bryant on April 13th, 2016. And he is, first of all, he's the first one tonight that it was not a playoff game. And second of all, he's the first guy we've done who's going out with a team that is the team you remember the guy on.
Yeah. And so before we get into this, and I know we'll probably finish with this part of it, but I feel like a couple of things are in order. Kobe Bryant died tragically young in 2020 in a, I know I just said tragically, but in a horrible tragedy that, made national news, and, no part of it is not horrible. And truthfully, it was probably the last major national news story before COVID, because it was in late January of 2020. Anything we're going to say about Kobe Bryant is going to be regarding him pretty much as a basketball player. We're not going to get into, we're not going to be overly colored by what happened, the circumstances surrounding his tragic death. And, we're not going to go back to what happened or didn't happen in a hotel room in Denver in the early 2000s. So anything we say, about Kobe Bryant is confined to, the circumstances surrounding his playing career and probably the end of his playing career. And the reason I bring that up is it's kind of unavoidable to me to talk about the last few years of Kobe Bryant's career on the Lakers without kind of mentioning how much of a circus in service of his ego.
He made a complete jerk out of himself.
Yeah. And so it became all about him. And we'll kind of go through the chronology a little bit, but I just, I had to get that out at the front. It might have seemed like a sort of bizarre thing, but that's where we are. So Kobe Bryant comes up with the Lakers in 1997? Is that his first year with the Lakers? After he's drafted,
I think his first year is the 96-97 season.
That would make sense. Yeah. So, obviously we're not going to come even close to going game by game or whatever, but he comes up, he's a young phenom. He becomes, one of the best players in the league almost immediately. He, was on those championship teams with Shaq. There's the blow up. He, then is around some bad teams for a couple of years and gives the most hilarious quote I've ever read about not passing the ball during those eras.
I just found this too. We always said it as Chris Mim and Smush Parker. He actually showed somebody else under the bus too. He says, this is this quote. He goes, "I almost won an MVP with Smush Parker and Kwame Brown on my team. I was shooting 45 times a game. What was I supposed to do? Pass it to Chris Mim or Kwame Brown?" So he throws three teammates under the bus. I always thought it was just Chris Mim and Smush Parker, but poor Kwame Brown gets some shrapnel in there too, which is tough for him because he was also the guy that Jordan killed in his latest years.
So 2007, 2008, Lakers are back on top. They Phil is back. He wins the MVP in 07, 08. They lose to the Celtics in the finals.
His only ever MVP in 08.
09, they win the championship. He's second in MVP. 10, they win another championship. He's third in MVP. The next few years, fourth, fifth. So 13, the 2012-2013 season, he's first team All NBA. He's fifth in MVP. The team is not, good by any stretch of the imagination. They're what do they do that year?
Can I just go back and give a little bit of color because I think it's interesting to sort of see how this all went. So 2011, Phil comes back and everybody thinks that maybe they're primed for a three-peat, and then they end up going to I think it's the second round. They get beaten by Dallas in the playoffs because they finish with a 57-25 record. They're first in the Pacific Division. So I don't know what that translates to as far as a seeding, but they're obviously in the top 3 or 4. And then they go to they're the 2 seed. They go to play the 3 seed in Dallas. They lose a couple of close games, and then I remember this game. It's a May 8th. I think it's a Sunday. May 8th, 2011. It's a 3:30 game, so it's either a Saturday or a Sunday, and they just get completely embarrassed. They're down by 24 at halftime, and then they just never make it any closer, really. They end up losing the game by 36 to Dallas. Phil retires shortly thereafter, and then who do they hire? Go ahead.
I went to dinner with mom and dad at TGI Fridays that day. Number 2, I remember being disappointed, even though I didn't particularly love those Lakers teams, because I was like, that was who I needed as my backup to beat the Heat. That was the first year of the LeBron, Bosh, Wade Heat team.
Yep.
And a lot of people, myself included, thought, okay, they're going to go up against the Lakers in the finals going for a three-peat. And instead it was the team that beat the Lakers who then beat the Heat.
So 2012, they're a division winner. They're again a 3 seed. Second year in a row, they lose. Mike Brown is the coach. They lose to the eventual Western Conference champion Thunder. That's okay though, because that'll make it all the sweeter when Mike Brown wins his championship with the Knicks. So, following year is when they make those trades. They bring in Dwight Howard and Steve Nash. And everybody's talking about how they're going to be some sort of a super team and challenge everybody. People talk about how unfair it is. It's this Lakers super team that's going to walk to a championship. Everybody, I think, thought that they would at least play Miami in the finals. They get off to a terrible start. Mike Brown gets fired after 4 games. They eventually bring in Mike D'Antoni, and then Kobe gets hurt. He messes up his Achilles in late in the season. He doesn't play. Although they do talk about how even though he knew he had tore his Achilles, he insisted on going to the foul line to shoot his 2 free throws. So there's sort of a mark in the positive column about what a competitor he was. So the Lakers they get swept by San Antonio without Kobe. I think Nash is basically on his way out at this point. He's coming to very much the end of his career. Following year, they tank 27-55. Kobe, I think, plays in 6 games at the beginning part of the season, and then is lost to an injury again for the rest of the year. And then you get to his final 2 years, coached by Byron Scott, who had been a teammate of Kobe when he first came to the Lakers almost 20 years earlier. And in 14-15, they win 21 games, and in 15-16, they win 17 games. So Kobe Bryant is going out on some god-awful, terrible Lakers teams.
So 13-14, he plays in the 6 games. He hurts his knee. 14-15, he plays in 35 games. He tears his rotator cuff. So
That's right. Yeah.
Also somewhere in here, and I don't remember exactly where it was, where there was footage of him screaming at Mitch Kupchak during practice about, how bad the team was and how he wasn't getting any reps because the guys on his team stunk and everything. And again, this is the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers do not miss the playoffs for multiple years in a row. Like, we did an episode on the Dark Days Lakers, and I think they missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, if that.
And there's front office drama going on here too. I think this is when the 2 Bus siblings are really fighting over the team, because I think it's the brother, whose name escapes me at the minute, hires D'Antoni without sort of consulting with Jeannie Buss, and then Jeannie Buss basically doesn't speak to D'Antoni for the 2 years that he was the coach of the team. So it's a mess.
So the team is bad. The last year Kobe's there is it's the worst record in Lakers franchise history. They finished 17-65. On November 29th of 2015, he announces his retirement. So he announces he's going to retire at the end of the season, pretty early in the season. He writes, I think it was the Players Tribune. He wrote like a big letter, Dear Basketball, announcing his retirement. Brian wrote, I fell in love with the game at age 6, a love so deep I gave you my all, from my mind, body, and soul, or from my mind and body to my spirit and soul. 2015-16 season is all I have left to give. My mind can handle it. My body knows it's time, et cetera, et cetera. Letter distributed to Lakers fans before that evening's game said, what you've done for me is far greater than anything I've done for you. My love for this city, the team, and each of you will never fade. He announced, he requested that they not do like a farewell tour for him, not get like gifts before the games and things like that. He did get video tributes, and they talk about how he got ovations in places which had historically jeered him, such as TD Garden in Boston, Moda Center in Portland, Sleep Train Arena in Sacramento, and Vivint Smart Home Arena in Salt Lake City. Most of those, I don't think, were named those things when we're talking in this time frame. The other one they mentioned is Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, which is just always so weird to me because it's his hometown, or as close to an American hometown as he has. There could be an entire, and there probably have been like entire, I don't know about a whole book, but essays written just about like Kobe Bryant's relationship with Philadelphia. You know what I mean?
I remember, I think it was my freshman year of college. I think it was the 2002 All-Star game where he won MVP that was in Philly, and they were just booing him out of the building. Why was that? Was that because somebody at some point had expected him to sign there, or were they just being Philly fans booing him? Why? I never really felt like I understood why they were. And you could tell too. The other thing about Kobe Bryant is that he was a very sensitive guy in a lot of ways. For all of his bluster, he was in a lot of ways. I mean, what was it? I think in one of the previous episodes, I talked about how he used to go watch the 10 Commandments. Like, he was kind of like much more of an intellectual and sensitive guy than I had thought. And I just remember watching that game. The booing was really bothering him.
Well, think about it. If it was the 2002 All-Star game, it was right after the 2001 finals.
That's fair.
So I think there was a few different things. I think it was that. I'd like to say it was because he didn't play in college in Philadelphia.
For LaSalle.
His father's alma mater, where his father was coaching at the time. But I think it was the finals. And then, I could get into a few different, issues I have with. I think they also never thought of him as a Philly guy because he was, grew up in France and whatever. And then I think also, or Italy, it was just that once they started booing him, it became a thing where they just booed him from then on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he goes through that season, and it's obviously kind of a long campaign of his last season, and at most places it's his last stop in various cities. Now again, this is a terrible Lakers team. It gets to the last game of the year, and I will admit I'd kind of forgotten about this until I looked for this, and there was like a 30-second interlude from when I looked and went, oh my God, he scored 60 points in his last game, until I remembered, I think he just shot like every time he conceivably could touch the ball.
He takes 50 shots.
It's still the record. Most shots taken in an NBA game ever. Now there's a few guys who were really close. It's not like the next closest one is 38, but he took the most shots in the history of an NBA.
Yeah, they're playing the Jazz. He's the only guy to score 60 in the NBA that whole season. So that's the only 60-point game in the NBA the whole season, which I thought was kind of funny. Career high 50 shots, which you're saying that's not just a career high, that's an all-time high for anybody. And he actually outscores the Jazz 23-21 on his own in the fourth quarter. And yeah, I mean, I hate to use this word, but it's the fact that he did that is essentially meaningless to me.
Yeah, the end of a season against a bad team. They're a bad team, Yeah, he had 50. Michael Jordan shot 49 in a game in 93. Jalen Brunson, Kobe Bryant again, Chris Webber all had 47. Kobe Bryant 46, 45 in that 2006 season.
Well, what was he supposed to do? Pass it to Kwame Brown or Smush Parker?
Again, I get that Kobe Bryant was always going to be a volume shooter, but I remember it. And it's like, they weren't playing tremendous defense on him. So he ends up with 60 points on what was the shooting in this game? What did he shoot? He shot 22 of 50, 6 of 21 from 3. He had 50 points. He had 60 points. He had 4 assists in a game. He shot the ball 50 times.
So yeah, he passed it like 6 times probably.
Yeah. So, obviously memorable, but again, as much as you'd say memorable in kind of a late era Kobe Bryant way, which was he did some things that were memorable and you had to hand it to him, but it was also slightly off-putting and clearly very self-serving.
I think I remember thinking when this happened and people were talking about what happened the night before, I remember thinking, of course that's what it was. Of course that late in the game, everybody just let him shoot to score as many points as he could.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, certainly memorable, but you can't discount the circumstances around it, the high volume shooting, he didn't even shoot that well in the game. And you get the sense that if he had been shooting well, he would have tried to get 100 points. and they probably would have let him if they, would that not that they would have let him, but they wouldn't have really tried that hard to stop him. Kind of like the All-Star game.
Yeah, no, that was what I was thinking. It had an All-Star game feel to it. So,
except it was the one-star game.
And I guess maybe just to sort of tie it all in a bow, a marked difference between playoff games, in some case World Series games, heavyweight title fights. This was very different than the first four that we talked about.
Yeah. And some of that you can't help. Even some of that, the fact that the team was bad is, one thing. Although again, I remember thinking for years that the Lakers had kind of been enthralled with Kobe Bryant a couple of years past when that was clearly ever going to pay basketball dividends. But, but some of it is also his doing. And honestly, the one it kind of reminds me of the most in a lot of ways is Jordan. Because, Jordan came back, but same thing, kind of like, this became all about you, and it sort of, I don't know if it diminished his legacy, but it certainly didn't add to it at the end.
Yeah, I think in certain ways it's kind of like what LeBron's doing now. Now, LeBron is not necessarily the selfish on-court player that Kobe could be, and far from it with LeBron, but you think of LeBron and you think, yeah, the guy's just been playing on, and guess what? They made the conference finals a couple years ago, but since he came to the Lakers, he's been on more bad teams than good. And it was the same thing. Think about what was going on in the NBA in 15 and 16. You had the, LeBron with Cleveland finally winning a championship. You had, I guess it was the following year that Durant joined the Warriors, but you had the Warriors, you had, the Durant Westbrook Thunder, you had all these things going on in the NBA, and then you just kind of had Kobe Bryant, out west on a 17-win team, sort of as almost like a sideshow.
Yeah, and especially, I don't remember that specific year, but it especially became a weird thing when the Clippers were good.
Oh, yeah, they were good too. Chris Paul and
choking in the playoffs, but the Lakers weren't even getting to the playoffs or coming close in these couple of years.
No, they were not. Absolutely not. Well, I think this was a good episode. We talked about some things. I think, like you said, not as sad this time, because even the Kobe thing, it's maybe sad for his legacy, but it's not sad for him. And, Gordie Howe scored a goal and Marciano kept his title. And, when you compare it to last time where, Ruth, even Jordan to a certain extent, certainly Ali, were kind of sadder stories. These were slightly better stories, I think, this time around.
Sad was Willie Mays. And Willie Mays went on to live a really happy life for 50 more years and everybody loved him. So
well, and sort of to your point too, they came within a one game 7 of winning a World Series, and he still, he got a hit in 2 different World Series games. So not as bad as some others. Not like Tom Brady, in his last game getting shut out.
All right. Well, I guess that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it for tonight. This was a good. I'm glad we did another one of these.
Yeah, no, these are always fun. I like sometimes when we do these, theme episodes, but not, but about a little bit different of a topic. So I was happy to do this.
There's something here for everybody, I guess is how you could put it. All right. Well, we will catch you all next time. But until then, I'm Dan Newman.
I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud. From gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high. From Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.